Hello, my friends. It's William back with the 1921 Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. And I will just start it off by saying, Mark Anderson, if you are watching this, here's your beautiful Christmas card. And I promise you that mine will reach you this year by Russian Christmas at the latest, but probably not by Western Christmas, because I'm a horrible procrastinator. Okay. Because I'm wearing my old, frayed, and very comfortable shirt this evening, it made me wonder if any of the Grand Dukes ever kept old, comfortable clothes and gave their valets, instructions. Don't throw that away. I want to keep that. So in my novel, Dmitri has precisely that. He has an old shirt that's not just comfortable, but very meaningful to him. Whether he did in real life or not, I don't know. It definitely wasn't an old Swiss farmer shirt like this one. But, yeah, something to think about, I guess. If I was to find out that a Grand Duke had something like that, I would find it very endearing, any of the Grand Dukes. Okay, so I want to try a new format with these. I am convinced that I'm never going to entirely lose my habit of rambling. That, unfortunately, it's something that I will try to work on, but I'm just never going to lose that entirely. I'm already rambling. But I watched the last one that I posted, and I was a little bit horrified at just how rambling it was, and I understand why people don't watch the entire videos. I don't think I would. I didn't even want to watch the entire video myself when I got to that part of it. It was kind of like, oh, are you finished yet? Ho hum. Okay, anyway, the new format. I want to start with a recap and then make any introductions. So any new person that appears in a diary entry, I want to say a word about them right at the beginning. So when they're mentioned in the diary entry, you already know who they are. And in this instance, there is a Danish man whom Dmitri spells his name R-E-L-E. I don't know if that was a real Danish name or not, but I have no information about him. So that's as much as of an introduction as I can give you. And Dmitri tells us a little bit about him. So then, after going to the recap and the introductions, I want to go to the diary entry itself, read it, and then, oh dear, my dog is pulling the couch cushions off because apparently there was a chew toy that fell between the cushions. Well, I will have to monitor that. Then, after the diary entry, the comments, and in the past, I've basically gone through the whole diary entry a second time. And that's redundant. You know what happened. I just read it. So I am going to try to keep my comments focused on any historical significance, any human significance. So for instance, something that I could use in my novel or something that any human being can relate to and that makes Dmitri interesting above and beyond being a Grand Duke. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes a little bit of a remark on linguistics, because I myself am both an ESL teacher and a translator. So this is something that just interests me very much. But there's not always anything to bring up. Okay, so let's start then with the recap. What happened the day before? Well, that would have been the 23rd of February, and Dmitri had this little faux pas with Marie-Louise, where he was at an event at her home, and he was told that she had asked to see him. She was sick in bed, and she had asked to see him, and he knew better. But he went upstairs to see her, and he made sure that there was a matron, there was a married woman who came upstairs with him. but she was still upset. And I finally had sufficient insight to realize that she wasn't upset because it compromised her in any way, but because she probably felt like she didn't look at her best. She was sick with the flu or with a very bad cold. She was in bed. Probably her hair was mussed up. If people wore makeup back then, she probably didn't have her makeup on. And that was what probably horrified her about it, because Dmitri tells us that she was upset. And I guess that would be why. Okay, so that's the recap. What next? Well, let's see. I should have made my notes bigger. I'm struggling to see them. And yeah, that's it. All right, here we go with the diary entry. 24th of February, 1921, Thursday, Copenhagen, and Dmitri is living at the English mission. I spent the morning at home writing. Both pars came here around lunchtime, bringing a Dane called Rella. He was very sympathique, with extremely pretty manners and a pleasant face. What could be better as that combination? We all took an afternoon walk. Even old Charles Murray came along. The weather was wonderful and sunny, but of course cold. There was ice on all the ponds. It wasn't thick enough for skating, but it was ice nonetheless. I had tea at home and around 6 o'clock took a nap. The life I've had to lead the past 2 weeks makes itself felt. The Marlings and I went to the Pars for dinner. Audrey had long since decided to give a party and decided that we would have dinner and then dance to gramophone music. It turned out to be a very successful evening. A terrible amount of wine and cocktails were consumed, but those present bore up very well, relatively speaking. After supper, I spent most of the night with Countess Bernstorff. She's terribly sweet and quite pretty. The topic of our conversation was, of course, Marie-Louise, whom she obviously loves very much. We got home only around 5 a.m. and arrived in a state of insane exhaustion. Oi, yes, I imagine you did, old boy. So, I should say that Countess Bernstorff was one of two women who Dmitri identifies as being sisters of Countess Wedel, whose maiden name was Moltke. And so I imagine they were related in some way to Marie-Louise. And Countess Bernstorff seems to have been the nice one. Countess Fries was the one who set Dmitri up, and whether she wanted to embarrass him or wanted to embarrass Marie-Louise, we don't know, but maybe both of them. But it was kind of a mean thing to do. The Pars, okay, this is a diary entry where the Pars appear. Audrey, you know her well if you've been following along with these. Prince Olga does not make an appearance. Apparently, even though he was a friend, seems to have been a fairly close friend of Audrey Pars, he wasn't invited. And Marie-Louise was sick. So, the Danish man, as I said, I know nothing about him, but I find what Dmitri has to say about him interesting, that he had extremely pretty manners, interesting expression, and a pleasant face. And then Dmitri writes, what could be better as that combination? And perhaps you've already guessed that that was a sentence he wrote in English. So even though his English was fluent and overall very good, you have these telltale signs that he wasn't a native speaker. So manners were always very important to him, even when he was a child. If there was one thing that bothered him, it was bad manners, especially bad table manners. And that was really why he was rather averse to Nicholas and Alexandra's girls, because he said they had horrible table manners. He was 14 and that just bugged him to death. The pleasant face, that's interesting. It more so than possibly it should have been the case. He was he liked people to be attractive. It makes me it makes me think a little bit about the persistent idea that Dmitri was either gay or bisexual, because this is a gay stereotype, right? I wouldn't say that it's probably a correct one, anymore. There are heterosexual men for whom manners are very important, and there are gay men for whom manners are very important. In the U.S., oddly enough, we have higher standards. We have sort of an upper middle class standard for how women should behave, but we have really a working class standard for how men should behave. And so if a man cares about things like manners or not belching when there's company over or anything like that, then, we think it's a little strange. I don't. But anyway, Dmitri was not gay. I think you've seen that. If he ever had any kind of sexual relationship with a man, it would have been, from what I can see, it would have been a one-off. And that happens sometimes with heterosexual men, and I have no information that it did happen, but I'm willing to stick my neck out and say, no, he was not gay. It doesn't matter to me one way or another, but he wasn't. And, I think the other reason for this persistent, some people don't even put it forth as a rumor. They say simply he was a gay man. And I think the reason for that primarily is because of his relationship with Felix Yusupov, who was a gay man. And again, there's this idea that a heterosexual man can't have a close friendship with a gay man, that the two men must be either lovers or at the very least both gay. And so that was simply not the case with Dmitri. Okay, what else? Let's see. So we've talked about Countess Bernstorff. And anything else? I'm not sure. Some of you could probably speak more to it than me, but I would say that from what I've heard, not all the Romanovs and not all members of royalty in general have pristine manners. But I think that was one of the reasons why people tended to find Dmitri particularly elegant and particularly regal, is because he was a little OCD about that. He was obviously taught to have pristine manners, but he took it to heart, and it really bothered him when other people didn't. Okay, let's see. Yeah, this is not the first time that he's talked about how draining it is to live this kind of existence, where you're going to party after party after party, and that catches up to you. And it does, even though he's not 30 yet, and it always bothers him after a while. He wasn't, another thing that he had such a reputation for was being a playboy, and I don't know if that word is justified, because he tended to get a little depressed and worn out and to reproach himself. He doesn't in this instance, but he tended to do that when he'd been going to, one party after another. It went against the grain with him a little bit. Okay, and the other thing is that even though he's tired and he's taking naps, I think my impression from the diaries, again, there's this persistent idea that he had tuberculosis already when he was in Russia. And I think what we're seeing is really a pretty healthy young fellow. The doctors would later assess him as having contracted the tuberculosis sometime around 1929. They thought he'd had it as a mild sort of chronic condition for about 10 years before it really turned into advanced tuberculosis. So, I also would dispute that. I don't think he was sickly. Okay. That is it. except for the preview of coming attractions, you could say. And tomorrow's diary entry will be a long one. In this diary entry, I wouldn't say that there's really anything that's historically significant. Whether you're a historian of Denmark or of Russia or of any other European country, this isn't going to give you any particular insight. But on the personal level, yeah, they all do. For me, they don't on the basis of each single diary entry taken on its own, but they're all part of the puzzle of, who Dmitri was as a human being, who we all are, and what makes us who we are as human beings. All right, so the preview. The next diary entry is a very interesting one because it will have a long and we'll have a long and heartfelt conversation with Ksenia's companion, significant other, however you want to say it, Grand Duke Ksenia. Her husband was off womanizing, doing his thing. They were living separate lives, and she had Sergei Dolgoruki to be her companion. I don't know at what level, but anyway, Dmitri hasn't had much contact with Ksenia or with Olga or with the Dowager Empress. Obviously, the Dowager Empress had health problems. But he is going to have this long conversation with Sergei Dolgoruki. And it's going to be a conversation where he does something very rare for him. He treats Sergei Dolgoruki as a confidant. And then there will be another visit to Count Mangdin in the evening. Very kind of him to do that. And finally, he'll have Marie-Louise will be back on her feet, and he'll have time to spend time with her again at a social event. So that's it for now. Good Lord, I still went 17 and a half minutes, but I'll work on it. All right, see you next time.